Paths Forward, in brief summary, is about how disagreements can be rationally resolved. It means having ways that people can correct you if you're wrong and they know that you're wrong. It also means having ways that if the other person is wrong, they can learn that you're right and change their mind instead of being stuck with no way to fix the problem. So there can be a rational resolution to a disagreement, a conflict, rather than no way to resolve the disagreement, no way for whoever is mistaken to find out. In general, we don't know everything. Some issues are hard to figure out, but the least we could do is resolve the ones where someone already knows the answer and someone else is wrong. We could get better at that. And broadly, the world is really bad at paths forward. And by the way, if you want to know more about paths forward, go to criticalfallibilism.com, my website. Search the page for the article titled Paths Forward Summary. It has links in it to more information. So what I wanted to talk about now is some applications of paths forward to real-world things other than intellectual debate. How can it apply to things besides public intellectuals who won't listen to critics and also don't write adequate explanations to answer critics' objections so the critics could see their errors if they're wrong? So, for example, today, my website went down. It's hosted by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean's website, where you go to get support for problems, is so horribly bad that I got a bit worried that it was basically impossible to get support for them, just like you can't really get support from Google. The link to get support takes you to a documents website where you can read pre-existing knowledge-based articles that don't help with your problem. And that's it, and there's no way to file a ticket. And it turns out there is a way to file a ticket, it's just virtually impossible to find. I had to click around repeatedly, do the same thing multiple times, and for some reason, at some point, the link somehow took me to a different page than the same link had taken me to before. I was actually in a loop where you get to the docs thing and you click sign in, and then it takes you back to your control panel, and then from your control panel, you click support, and then it takes you back to the docs thing. But I did it multiple times, and somehow I ended up on the ticket generation page. And then the ticket categories are terrible and make no sense and don't fit my situation. And then it was impossible to type in the box where you explain what the ticket's about. So then I had to go do the same thing again in Firefox, except I couldn't get back to the ticket page. No matter what I clicked on, I couldn't get there again, was unable to duplicate it. So I had to copy the URL from the first browser into the second browser in order to go directly to the page where you can create tickets because there's no way to get there from their website. So they really seem like one of these faceless megacorps that you can't talk to at all. And they are quite large. And I was pretty sure the problem was on their end and that there was simply nothing I could do other than hope they fix it. The only thing I could do, besides switching providers, was restore from backup and make a new server from a backup. And that's not a very good option when you don't know what went wrong and how to avoid it in the future and whether it's going to happen again. And so when I finally submitted a ticket, I also Googled DigitalOcean response times. And back in like 2015, they used to respond to help requests usually in under an hour. But in 2019, there were complaints that you could just wait 3 days and hear nothing. And if you don't like it, go with someone else and just leave the platform because it's not going to change and they don't listen. And that's just what you find when you Google this. Actually, I use DuckDuckGo. I hate Google. But anyways, and they don't contradict that anywhere. There's no answer to it from DigitalOcean. And when companies' support gets a lot worse, it usually doesn't get a lot better again. So that looked pretty bad, and I thought I might just be screwed, and my website is just down and completely gone and unusable, and no one can read my articles, and I wasn't very happy about that. And so I felt quite powerless and disempowered because I just have to wait and hope that they'll respond, and I have no idea when they're going to respond. And if they do respond, a lot of times tier one customer support is useless. And you have to go back and forth multiple times and it takes days. And sometimes that doesn't even work. And another story I read said they waited 16 days with no response, and then their ticket was closed with no explanation of why it was closed. And so maybe that'll happen to me. I don't know. So I was very not confident because they have this poor reputation. And on top of that, they don't know how to make a website where you can actually find the ticket page and file tickets in any reasonable way. It's horrible. And then the ticket submitting process is entirely unusable in Mac Safari. It just doesn't work. You cannot type. I don't know how they broke text areas in a major browser, but they did it. It's just a text box, except that you can't type in it somehow. But then you go to Firefox and you can type in the text box. And it's their job to make it work for their customers using major browsers. So they seem really bad at things and incompetent and stuff. And what's worse is I've read reviews and recommendations and stuff, and there are no companies I have a lot of confidence would be better. I've used Linode for a long time, and I think they might be better, but they were recently bought by Akamai. And Akamai is a big company that I don't know much about and could easily make Linode much worse and ruin it. A different web host I used to use, SliceHost, that seemed pretty good, seemed about equal to Linode. I had some positive experiences with them, and then they were bought by a larger company, and then they became terrible. That's a pretty common thing that happens. So I felt like there's very few options for how to fix anything, and you just hope that they listen. Now, as it happened, they responded in 3.5 hours, and they said, "We have no idea why it's broken. This is not obvious at all, but we'll escalate internally and get back to you." So that was okay. And then 15 minutes later, they're like, "Oh, our tech guy fixed it. Try it now." And then it worked. And I got no information about why it was broken. It was apparently a problem on their end. And so everything's better now. But what if they didn't fix it? I have no recourse. There's basically no good options. So there's a real problem there that is very hard to get these kind of issues resolved. Now you might wonder what that has to do with Paths Forward. Paths Forward is about disagreements. If I think that a company should allocate resources to dealing with my problem, my complaint, my issue, and that company is not allocating resources that way, that is a disagreement about how that company should allocate resources. So that is an appropriate thing for Paths Forward. There's a disagreement between people about what should be done. And Paths Forward enables disagreements to be resolved. So if I think that this group should be paying attention to this particular thing and they don't, we have a disagreement. You might think that's abusable, but if someone thinks they should get attention and they shouldn't, if they're wrong, then that can be resolved. Like, they can find out they're wrong. Just ignoring them is not actually a good way to treat your customers or deal with people who want your attention. I'm not saying it's a trivial problem for how to deal with it when there are a lot of people who are wrong and want attention, but it is an important thing to work on instead of just ignore. And then there's the people who are not wrong mixed in, like me. My website was down. I was correct that my website was down. And it was not, in fact, something that I could fix on my end. They needed to fix it. And so I was right that they should pay attention to this problem. And they did this time, but they could have just not. Google is known for breaking things, screwing people over, and then just ignoring them, and there's nothing you can do. I just watched a story today. This is Amazon. This is how Amazon treats people, Amazon Game Studios in particular. Someone got banned on Lost Ark, and they had spent over 400 hours on the game, making their account, leveling up their characters, etc., and they'd spent real money. And they just got banned, and it was entirely not their fault. And then customer support was basically like, go screw yourself. Stop contacting us. We don't want to hear from you. You're wasting our time. We don't want to answer you. Go away. And customer support was just completely wrong and unreasonable. And lots of people have been banned this way, and a lot of companies are doing this to people. And the thing that person actually did, they were accused of refunding a purchase. So they're like, you got this thing in game, but then you refunded it, but you still have it in game, so that's why we're banning you. Which doesn't even make sense. If you refund something, why wouldn't they just delete it in game, but not ban you? I don't understand. Maybe it was a chargeback. I don't know. But the person did not, in fact, do that. What they did was do an in-game trade with another player, and they got an item from that player, and then that player did a refund or a chargeback or something. And so the person who got banned was not the person who originally bought the item and had no control over this process. And it's just entirely not their fault and they shouldn't be banned. And yet this is unfixable and they are banned and they lost their 450-hour account that they spent money on too. And it just cannot be fixed. Amazon will not listen. And a lot of people have had a lot of bad experiences trying to talk with megacorps and get disagreements resolved. Disagreements, should my account be banned or not? And even if 90% of the people are wrong, 90% of the public, the customers are wrong, you still need to address these things and fix the ones where you're completely wrong and just took away something someone spent 400 hours on. Asmongold, by the way, it was his video where I saw this. He thinks that companies do this on purpose because they are greedy capitalists and they are good at math, and hiring a bunch of customer support people costs too much money, and they mathed it out. They just did an equation and they figured out that the public relations hit and pissing off some of their customers and getting bad press, like Asmongold's video, is has a negative value in dollars that they can calculate, and then they can compare it to the price of hiring a bunch of customer service staff so they're not so understaffed and can do a better job. And he thinks they mathed it out and they just make more profit this way and that they don't regret it and that they're doing the profitable thing and they're going to keep doing it because it makes them money so they can buy more yachts. And I do not agree with that. My opinion is that it's definitely not profitable, that these people are incompetent, the CEOs and whatever, that they should have better customer service, that it's a fixable problem, that it is worth the money to fix, that treating your customers horribly and getting all this bad PR is actually bad for business. I'm more optimistic, and I think there's room to pay people to represent your company and do a good job, and then make a profit doing that. And I also just think a lot of people are incompetent, including CEOs and stuff. Like, I think to some extent, Asmongold hates the CEOs of these corps, of like Blizzard and Amazon Game Studios and stuff, and doesn't respect them and doesn't like them and has mocked Bobby Kotick a ton. But on the other hand, he seems to respect them as good at doing math and figuring out what's profitable and stuff. And I think that they're idiots and have no idea what they're doing. And that having this terrible customer support is just not worth it for them at all. It's not even close. And they just have no idea how to figure out whether it's worth it. They have no idea what they're doing. Blizzard in particular, I think, is a good example because they have terrible support for World of Warcraft now. But they used to have good support for World of Warcraft. And the thing about World of Warcraft is there's a monthly subscription where people are paying like $10 to $15 a month to play the game. And so when every customer is paying you on a monthly basis, you can absolutely afford to hire people to give them support and answer their questions and solve their problems and stuff and give a good experience to them. It doesn't have to be a super understaffed, super automated system that basically bans a bunch of people at random and totally ignores complaints. The cost-cutting excuse does not make a lot of sense for these people who are paying monthly, and you could allocate a little bit of what they paid to hire a support staff. And then if they have good experiences, you can grow the game and get more people paying monthly instead of bleeding subscribers for the last like 10 years, which is what they've been doing. So I think the CEOs are wrong. I disagree with them, but there are no paths forward to get that disagreement resolved. The web hosting thing and how powerless people are, I think, is interesting because society is moving away from people having their own things, their own websites. You're supposed to just make a Facebook page and think that's a website or something. We used to have GeoCities and Blogger and stuff, and that's all much less popular than it used to be. And you're allowed to have your own website. It's not prohibited or anything. It's just disincentivized. And a lot more people just stick to social media. They go on Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and stuff and don't want to go to third-party websites they're not familiar with. There's more resistance from users to doing that kind of thing than there used to be. and it is, in some ways, inconvenient. The cable internet companies don't want you to host websites from your house. You have to rent a little piece of a server in a data center from someone like DigitalOcean, and then hope they listen when it breaks and you contact them. You can't just have your own computer that you own and that you have physical access to so you can solve your own problems. You have to rely on some big company. The trend away from do it yourself and lots of independent distributed things in different places and people doing their own thing and having control over their own thing is a worrying trend. It's related to the death of RSS, which still exists and people use it, and it's actually, you can use it for a lot of things. Like every YouTube channel has an RSS feed, and that's nice, and I use it, but RSS as a whole is not popular. Google killed their RSS reader. The sort of open internet is not doing well. And there are people who notice this and write about it. Daring Fireball has a huge audience and has talked about this and complained and stuff. And he's a big proponent of RSS. But it doesn't change it. And there's no way to get a debate with the other side. Like, who is doing this to the world, and why won't any of them debate? If not me, someone much more famous like Daring Fireball, or his name's John Gruber. Daring Fireball is the blog's name. Like, I get you can't debate everyone on the other side, but can you debate any of them? Where is anyone who's supposed to represent my opinion, who has gotten any answers or debate about this? And part of it is there's no one in particular on the other side that's doing it. It's many different people independently doing their own little thing. But there are certainly representatives that you could look at, like Facebook. Facebook is really into platform capture where they want to get people on their site and keep them there. And instead of using the internet in general, you can have your own mini internet entirely on Facebook and never leave Facebook and go read the news and talk to your friends and do all the things. It's a little bit like AOL used to be. And these sites, I think one of the things that really shows off what they're doing is when they have these warnings that say, like, this link is going to a third-party website. Like, warning, you are now leaving YouTube. Warning, you are now leaving Facebook. You're leaving the walled garden. The fact that they're warning you about that shows the level of resistance to it, how it's not normal. And I've run into it in a practical way. A lot of people just don't want to click on links. Like, you can tweet something and they'll read the tweet, but they will not click the link. And so not only are there no way to get paths forward with the various people I might want it with to debate Mark Zuckerberg or someone, but no one on the other side will even take responsibility and write an article saying what they're doing or why they think it's good. They won't even admit to what their position is. There are no representatives of the other side that want to take responsibility for their side, which is actually a common thing. It happens even with intellectuals about intellectual issues. You can go to Less Wrong, and there are no representatives of their philosophy who will stand up and take responsibility for the correctness of their philosophy and try to argue why it's right and defend it. They're at Less Wrong. What you will find on their forums are individuals who will debate individual issues in a sort of sporadic, disorganized, incomplete way. Like, some people will talk about whatever they feel like to the extent they feel like and then quit, but no one takes responsibility for the bigger picture. And the thing about talking with those individuals is they disagree with each other. One guy will say, oh, you're wrong because this, and someone else will say you're wrong because that, and they will contradict each other. And so you're not arguing with a single position, you're arguing with scattered individuals. There's no one taking responsibility for Less Wrong's point of view. I think that's bad, and it's important to have leaders and responsible figures who actually try to address issues. And I think that's what made Apple great. Was Steve Jobs was a leader who took responsibility for things. So he had taste and he used judgment and he made decisions and he was willing to say no to things. And if Apple was bad or wrong or whatever, it was his fault. And also, famously, you could email him. The public could email him, and he actually responded to some of them. And I've actually seen that with a lot of people I respect, like Ayn Rand or Richard Feynman. Both answered some letters from the general public, from strangers who with no fame or reputation or anything. And I've had that experience personally when contacting some people and not others. Like Thomas Sawes and George Reisman are intellectuals who I liked, and then when I contacted them, they replied that was possible to do. Then there's other ones. There are a lot of people who are more famous than that, no more busy, but they don't want to talk. Anyway, the main point I wanted to say was about how society has all these mega corporations, and it's very hard to get issues with them resolved. The customer service from so many of them is really bad. US healthcare, trying to get customer service from like the health insurance companies is a nightmare. Comcast, cable internet, the phone companies, the wireless phone companies, they're so bad to deal with. A lot of the government stuff, terrible. If you are like a veteran and you need health care or something, you have to deal with Medicare, Social Security, the IRS, all those things. If you have a problem, sometimes things go fine and sometimes they don't. And if they don't, it's really bad because these systems are bad at getting stuff fixed. A lot of them, they have processes that work over 90% of the time. And if you go through the process and it works, it's not so bad. And if something goes wrong, you might just have to wait months. You get ignored, and it's very hard to get anything fixed and hard to get any answers. And everyone passes the buck and no one takes responsibility. And it's just, and I think people don't connect those problems with not being heard and being ignored and terrible customer service to paths forward. But it is the same basic issue. There is a disagreement where you think that they should do something or fix something or explain something or and they don't think so or they'd be doing it. So there is a disagreement there. In general, people ought to practice taking issues, any kind of conflict or problem or something that involves two or more people, and phrasing it as a disagreement, phrasing it specifically as a disagreement of ideas between the two people. You should get used to that and make it intuitive so you can see more things as disagreements. One of the reasons that I don't get feedback sometimes, or I have problems with people on my forums, is they disagree with me, but they don't even recognize that they disagree with me. So then they just silently disagree with me and there's no way to resolve the issue. And they don't recognize that they're doing that because they didn't even realize they disagreed. I think that people should watch my Max tutoring videos and try to study and practice and learn things. And then they don't do it, and then they don't talk about it, and then they also, if asked, don't see that as them disagreeing with me and then refusing to discuss or speak up about their disagreement. They just don't categorize it mentally that way because they don't have a good understanding of what disagreements are, which is just the kind of thing that they might get better at if they actually studied and learned from my material, which they're not doing. It's tricky though, because I don't want to bug anyone into doing it. If they do it on my initiative, it doesn't work, it doesn't help. They need their own motor, their own goals. They need to want to for their own reasons, or it's not going to be productive. And so if I just in a very generic way tell people in general, no one in particular, that they should do it, even that is enough that some people will try to do it because I said so instead of because they think it's a good idea in their own mind with their own judgment. And then they'll have bad experiences and blame me. And as I've realized more that people do that kind of thing, I've shied away a bit more from giving even very generic, vague advice because I don't like it when people think they're acting on my advice and then do things completely wrong that I disagree with and then blame me. I don't like them using me in that way to play that negative role in their life. And there are no paths forward to fix that, of course. But anyway, the basic issue with these megacorps that don't listen is that is no path forward. There's no way to get a disagreement with them resolved. There's no way to get an issue, a complaint, a problem with them resolved. So that is what lack of paths forward looks like in practice in a widespread, widely acknowledged problem in the world that is different than public intellectuals lacking paths forward for ideas and not listening to criticism. A lot of people feel like they can't change the world. They can't really be ambitious because no one will listen, no one will give them a chance. Even if they're right, even if they have good critiques of things and ideas about how to make things better, they have no power, and the people with power just don't listen. You can't affect them. It's a pretty common sort of experience or perspective. And I think the fundamental thing there is the lack of path forward. So it doesn't matter who's right, because either way, the person in power is going to get their way. The person without power is going to remain disempowered and never find out whether their ideas were good or bad because they never get to try anything out or have a reasonable discussion about it. I actually saw another story related to this the other day. It was about Elden Ring, which is doing extremely well. It's on the top of the charts on Steam. It's a recently released video game. And it is the sixth game from Software of a similar style. And the thing it's most known for is being difficult. And that kind of stands out when most of the games are trying to be really easy so that your grandma can play, so everyone can feel like a winner. And the series comes along and tries to be hard and gets really popular. And so I found out about the story of how this game series exists and what happened. Why did this series buck the trends? And the answer is there's one guy who had no power, no significant power, and could not get the top executives to listen to him or anything. And he had some ideas about how to make a good game, and he worked in a video game company, From Software, that had made a bunch of games, and they were mediocre, and they were like competent enough to make games and stay in business, but they weren't very good, and they didn't have any big hits. And he had no real influence or anything. He couldn't make the games he wanted. And he couldn't just go to his boss and discuss it or something. That was never going to work. But what happened was there was a game that was in development, and it was in development hell. It wasn't working. It was doing badly. The prototype or the demo looked really bad. Everyone thought the game was going to fail. And they had tried to fix it and revamp it and various things, and it was delayed and it was still terrible. And they figured it wasn't going to make much money, but it was, for whatever reason, they weren't actually canceling it. And so he saw an opportunity. No one cares about this thing. If I can get assigned to this project, I can take it over. I can take control of it. I can actually have some power over something. And so he did it. He got assigned to the project that was doomed. He got himself on the failure. And he figured if his ideas were bad and it failed, it wouldn't be that big a deal because it was already expected to fail anyways. So it did lower the risk for him. But anyways, he successfully got on the project and started changing things how he wanted to, because no one with power wanted to be on that project. So there wasn't like a bigger boss there making a bunch of bad decisions and just giving orders and not listening. So he actually managed to have some control over things. So he made the game harder and did some various other things. And then it was their best-selling game ever. So then after that, of course, they're going to give him another chance. And then the next game sold even better, so he got to work some more. And so it was just one guy who didn't care what was expected to sell. And he did not convince anyone to give his ideas a chance. He did not talk to the powerful elites at his company and get listened to at all. They would only listen to him after he managed to make a game and turn failure into success. And then they would listen. But before that, there were no paths forward. After he made them millions of dollars, then they're like, oh, okay, I guess we'll let you do that a second time. So I just thought it was amazing, that story of what he had to do because there were no paths forward. No way to discuss how should the game be designed and who is right and why. If you can't have that discussion and you don't have power, what do you do? And one of the answers is find an abandoned project that no one cares about. If no one thinks it matters and they're willing to neglect it, then even if you're not very powerful, you might be able to get control over it. And then if it succeeds, you can work from there. That reminds me of another story. This is a story that David Deutsch told me, and I discussed it a bit on the forum recently. So David Deutsch's opinion is that there are no first-rate physicists anymore, and not even second-rate. He thinks that he is like a low third-rate physicist, if I remember correctly, and that he's near the top, one of the best currently working. And so what happened to the field? Why aren't there great physicists anymore? Because in his opinion, this is not a permanent problem. It's not a problem with humanity. It's not that we're all too dumb or anything. He had a photo from a conference from early 1900s. It was a famous conference with 40 great physicists or whatever. And he said in that photo, there were like 7 first-tier physicists, and now there are none. So he's not having some impossible standard that people can't live up to. It's just a few generations ago, we had a bunch of great physicists. Richard Feynman was one of the last ones. What's notable is it's not just David's opinion, but also Richard Feynman, who David had a conversation with, basically thinks there won't be any more great physicists. And the reason is, in short, bad education, that the schools are destroying the minds of all the physicists, and the way they teach physics just prevents anyone from being really good at it. So David's explanation of why this happened or what went wrong, because the schools used to be bad too, what changed is in the past, before World War II, the people in power, like the top politicians and stuff, did not know that physics was important. They didn't care about it. It was neglected, just like the video game that people thought was going to fail. And so the physicists were left alone. And David gave me an example that illustrates the mindset. And he's not positive it's a true story, but he thought even if it's not, that it's roughly accurate in terms of the spirit of the example. And the example is that when Einstein came to the US, a newspaper called him a famous mathematician from Germany rather than calling him a famous physicist. Maybe it wasn't famous, like genius or great or whatever. But the point is they called him a mathematician instead of a physicist, and that reflected how little people knew about physics and how it wasn't a respected profession in the way it is today. And so that is why we had great physicists, is because the people in power in our society did not care about physics. And after World War II, and after nuclear weapons, the people in power cared a great deal about physics and realized it was actually really important. And it wasn't just nuclear weapons, there were other things, and it's not just physics, it's also math, like the code breaking and stuff in World War II with Turing and various things like that, and computers, people, that also is a related thing that started getting the attention of the people in power, and they started caring about that stuff more. But anyways, yeah, physicists managed to make nuclear weapons, and then the people in power said, hey, you guys are actually important. And then they ruined physics. Because once the people in power cared and it was no longer a neglected field, that is what destroyed it. And that is why there are no more first-rate physicists. I find this story plausible. I have not carefully researched it, but I don't know of any reason that it's wrong, and I don't find anything about it particularly hard to believe. And it is actually a pretty similar story to the one with Elden Ring. The original game was Demon's Souls, and then the next 3 were Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. And so the story that something great can flourish when the people with power just ignore it, that makes sense to me. And once the people with power start paying attention, they take control over things, and they do it wrong, and they will not listen to criticism, and they will not have rational discussion, and there are no paths forward. And so then they destroy it. And it's happening to the internet. The internet was wonderful, and it used to be a lot more neglected, and is very much not neglected anymore. And the open internet is being taken over by mega corporations like Facebook. And those corporations have a lot of connections to the government and politicians. And the politicians are also talking a lot about regulating tech companies and controlling them in various ways. The government is fully willing to decide how Apple should run its App Store and to make laws about that. They are considering saying that Apple has to allow side-loading software. In other words, allowing users to install software on iOS devices like iPhones that does not come from the App Store, that you could just download apps from any website with no safety controls or anything. And I think forcing Apple to do that, not letting them run their platform their way, is really bad and will make it worse. Previously, the government went after Apple for the whole antitrust lawsuit regarding ebooks, where somehow Amazon has 80% or whatever of the ebooks market, but the antitrust people sue Apple because Amazon spent more money on lobbying or something. I think a lot of people intuitively know that you can't reason with the customer service departments from mega corporations. They can't reason with the elite politicians and the powerful billionaires and whatever. You can't, to a large extent, even reason with your local police department. There's a major societal problem there. A lot of people are wrong about their proposed solutions or exactly what's going on. Often they blame capitalism or malice or other things. I think the core issue is irrationality, and Hal Howard talks about what the problem really is and some things that could be done about it.